Just wait for the speaker. If you wish to experience peace, provide peace for another. If you wish to know you are safe, cause another to know that they are safe. If you wish to understand seemingly incomprehensible things, help another to understand. If you wish to heal your own sadness or anger, seek to heal the sadness or anger of another. Dalai Lama.
Glenn. Minister statements. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to begin by again expressing my gratitude to all the health and social services workers in the Northwest Territories. These dedicated professionals have been serving the needs of residents through some very difficult times. I want to assure staff, as well as my colleagues here today, and residents of the Northwest Territories, that the Department of Health and Social Services is working hard to find solutions that will ease pressure on the system. Mr. Speaker, the results of the Retention and Recruitment Survey of Nurses conducted in November 2021 indicated that in the first year of the pandemic, 94% of the nurses in the territory experienced symptoms of burnout, and 90% were asked to work overtime. This problem has reached a point where many health professionals are choosing to leave their field, retire, or reduce their working hours. There's tremendous competition to recruit physicians, nurses, and nurse practitioners to work in every jurisdiction in the country. Staffing shortages have become so severe that service reductions in healthcare have not only become necessary, but in many places they are routine. As of June 2022, the vacancy rate for nurses in the territory was 25.7%. That rate, while slightly lower than the same period last year, is a significant increase from September 2020, when the vacancy rate was 9.7%. By the way, the vacancy rate for family practitioners and specialists in the Northwest Territories was 42% in June. Mr. Speaker, our Health and Social Services leadership team has heard the concerns of staff, and we recognize their need for a better work-life balance. Their mental health, safety, job performance, and satisfaction depend on it, as does the sustainability of the system. We've taken several steps to address staffing shortages. Indeterminate staff have been temporarily reassigned, as needed, to support critical service areas. The health authorities have used a combination of locums, casual, and agency nurses to cover staffing shortages. Mr. Speaker, we've begun using paramedics to assist in hospitals and acute care emergency room operations, as well as to provide support in small community health centers. To address the regular staffing challenges during the holiday season, we introduced the Friend and Family Travel Program, in which all casual, term, and indeterminate frontline nurses and physicians scheduled to work at least 5 days between December 20th and January 4th can bring 2 family members or friends to their northern place of employment. Based on our survey results and our engagement with nurses, we know that 85% learned about employment opportunities in the Northwest Territories by word of mouth and by visiting the government's website. To encourage more word-of-mouth recruitment, we've created an incentive for N.W.T employees to refer healthcare professionals to work in the territory. Mr. Speaker, we know that building relationships with staff early in their tenure in a new community increases their likelihood of success in the role and increases retention rates. 4 onboarding specialist positions have been created within the health authorities to provide a thorough orientation and help new hires settle into their new environment. We've increased locum pay to remain competitive with other jurisdictions in Canada. In addition, locum physicians are reimbursed for the cost of licensing fees upon completing a contract with the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority. We continue to cover nurse licensing fees as well. We are also working to issue licenses to physicians as quickly as possible so they can work as soon as possible. These are the immediate steps the department has taken to address staffing shortages. The Health and Social Services Human Resources Plan, which was tabled during the June session, outlines our medium and long-term plans for recruitment and retention. Mr. Speaker, these initiatives will help Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority to avoid further service reductions and improve work-life balance for employees. We recognize the value of the wonderful staff we have who are devoted to serving the residents of the Northwest Territories. We must ensure that retention remains our top priority as we continue to find creative ways to stay competitive in our recruitment efforts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Colleagues, before we continue, I'd like to draw your attention to the presence in the public gallery of a number of visiting parliamentarians, parliamentary officers, and accompanying persons who are here in Yellowknife this weekend to attend the 42nd Canadian Regional Parliamentary Seminar. MPs and MLAs from across Canada will be participating in a number of business sessions in the coming days, commencing with the observation of statements and questions in the chamber this morning. I suspect those of you who serve in partisan legislatures will find our unique style of consensus government a real change of pace. I've asked all our members to be on their best behavior while you are here. Just kidding. These gatherings give us a chance to share our ideas and experiences and create important political connections, no matter where we come from in Canada or what political stripes we wear. I sincerely welcome you all to the Northwest Territories and to our Assembly. There are so many of you to name everyone this morning, but I do want to make special mention of a few of my fellow speakers who are in attendance. Speaker Raj Chauhan of British Columbia, Speaker Myra Dredger of Manitoba, Speaker Bill Oliver of New Brunswick, and Speaker Tony Okowak of Nunavut. Welcome to you all, and I look forward to productive discussions in the coming days. Thank you very much. Member statements. Member for Haverhill South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to make a quick comment that he actually did ask us to be nice. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about fairness, equity, and respect. Mr. Speaker, I have received numerous emails and calls on this topic from health workers in Hay River. Those emails paint a picture of dwindling morale as these workers hear that their counterparts within the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority have received a labour market supplement, while there was no provision made for those within the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority. Mr. Speaker, health workers in Hay River have provided exceptional service to all residents over the years, and even more so during the last 2.5 years as they dealt with the pandemic, flood, and staff shortages. The stress associated with this is only now being realized by many of those health workers. To add to that stress, they now hear that there may be no wage supplement for them. In their own words, they are feeling disrespected, undervalued, and underpaid. The many hours and shifts required, the time away from family, staff shortages, and their commitment to providing timely medical care and services to residents must be recognized. And this recognition comes in the form of fairness and compensation. Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T recognize that in exceptional circumstances, there is a need to address labor retention and shortages by quickly adjusting compensation packages. This recognition resulted in establishing the Labor Market Supplement Policy, a policy that only exists within this government and is not part of the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority. Mr. Speaker, as with many contracts, if there is an agreement between the parties, there is then a path to move forward to resolve an issue. In this instance, with agreement from the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority, the Union, and the N.W.T, a memorandum of agreement could be pursued that would provide a market supplement to Hay River Health and Social Service Authority employees. Mr. Speaker, the supplement I talk about has been quantified. We know it will now be paid to a number of Northwest Territories Health and Social Service Authority employees. Precedence has been set. So let us extend it to employees of the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority. As we are in this together, let us provide fair and equal treatment when it comes to the labor market supplement for all healthcare workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Member statements. Member statements. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I want to say thank you to all my frontline workers in my communities that are in the N.W.T, and to my constituents, our past elders, our elders in the communities are always ready to listen, to help and assist us as leaders and regular people, our youth, our future. You know, keep being resilient. I know we live in the most northerly communities in the north, and that's what makes us so good. Frontline staff, our RCMP, our nursing stations, our social workers, our teachers, the Canadian Rangers, our mental health workers, our Hamlet grad staffs in all communities, our housing, the management, the N.W.T corporate group, and Mr. Speaker, all our volunteers that do so much that never get really recognized, but thank them for what they do. Sax Harbour, my leadership, Mayor Norman Anakina and Council, John Lucas and the Community Corp of Sax Harbour and his board, Paulatuck Ray Rubin and his council, Lawrence Rubin and the Paulatuck Community Corp, his board, Ulakaktok, Josh Aluktuak and his council, Colin Okina for his community corporation, Tuck, my home community at Tuktiaktuk, my mayor Erwin Elias and Ryan Yakalaya. We've been working together this last month really closely for all what's been happening in my home community. And we've got through, and we're still working together to make sure community in the riding is working together to get things done. To all who are HTCs who take care of our land and take care of the resources, which is our caribou and what's needed to be looked at. Mr. Speaker, I really want to thank my good friend Jordan Tutu for coming to Tuck. I called him up, and he just doesn't go on short notice. You're almost a year out, you have to wait, but I knew him since he was 15 years old. And I called him and I said, this is what's happening in my home community. I need your help. The young youth wanted him to come up, and that's why Jordan came, is because I called him and he wanted to help us with our youth. And now we're looking at planning a bigger for the Beaufort Delta in coming April. So all the youth get to see him and get motivated by him. He's such an awesome young man, and he's doing so good, for our youth, and the kids loved him. And I just really want to thank him for coming and thank all the leadership. And I miss doing the lunch and breakfast program in my home community at Tuck for the students. But Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't be able to do what I do without thanking my wife, Jenny, for being behind me with all this last couple of months in trying times in my community, and being there for me to be able to do what I do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Nivik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've mentioned this in the House before, you know, and I come to Yellowknife, I go for a drive. I go for a drive down Ingham Trail. I drive around, and it's so nice to be able to drive on chip seal and pavement, even out to your campgrounds. So, you know, I want to take this time to just explain a little bit about what goes on in my community. This summer, the constituency of Inuvik had a lot of work done and occurring on our Dempster Highway widening project. Not only did 2 of the local contractors from the region bid on it, but were successful in an open process to do this work. And it looks like those 2 sections were completed on time and on budget from what I'm hearing. Road construction contracts in my community and my region are vital to keeping local contractors providing jobs to our local residents, which keeps the food on the table and the lights on. Mr. Speaker, part of the work that was completed this summer was the widening of the Marine Bypass Road, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, a job well done by the contractor and the department on that section. Mr. Speaker, the bypass road in Inuvik is not only used by vehicles, but it's also used by the people out for walks, exercise, as well as other recreational activities. I can say even as far back, some of my colleagues in here remember PE class where we had to run the 5-kilometer run in school at the bypass. So it's used for many, many different activities. Now that the snow has started to fall at home, you can hardly notice the one complaint that we all have with that part of the road for about 5 months of the year, Mr. Speaker, mud and dust. Mud and dust. That is something that is so common to us up in the Delta. The dust some days carries throughout the town and can be a nuisance, can even creep in, it does creep into all of our homes when the windows are left open. It can also be a real safety issue for vehicles and pedestrians alike. Flying rocks can also be very dangerous for the people that use this portion of the road. And that's not even talking about the mud that occurs when it rains. It also makes it very dangerous. Mr. Speaker, today I'll have questions for the Minister, and I'll be looking for a commitment to finally chip seal or pave that portion of the road, Mr. Speaker, so that our residents of Inuvik can enjoy to the fullest and finally put an end to the annoying, dangerous, unhealthy cloud of dust, flying rocks and mud that the residents of Inuvik face every year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On the first day of the last sitting, I asked questions about the limited public engagement opportunities in the ongoing development of new mining regulations. Why is this important? Because hundreds of millions of dollars are at stake in potential government revenues. The regulations will determine when and how people may get notified about mineral exploration, whether there will be any enforceable benefits from larger projects, if more or all of the geoscience collected during exploration is going to be publicly reported and saved, and lots more. The Industry, Tourism and Investment Minister and staff proposed that public engagement take place from May to July, but not much has happened so far. There's a rather general information on a single web page and the ability to submit comments on this list of vague topics. The timeline is slipping and public engagement may not happen now until spring of next year. Several contracts have been issued for research as follows, but none of it has been made available to the public. $24,000 study by 2 former ITI employees on map staking, a $100,000 contract for legal assistance with potential dispute resolution between mining companies and the minister, and a $200,000 contract for policy advice from the University of Calgary on how mining rights are managed elsewhere. I applied under access to information and got the first report on map staking, and I tabled it in the House in the last sitting. It's not clear if and when ITI will release any of these secret documents or internal research. Discussion papers and option papers have been developed and discussed at a technical working group of Indigenous government staff, and I support that process. But I also applied for these documents too under access to information almost 6 months ago. I was told I had to pay $260 to get what I expect will be heavily redacted documents. I'm still waiting for those documents, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, the department is holding detailed secret meetings with the mining industry to develop these regulations. Draft regulations are supposed to be posted in the spring, but comments and responses may not be public. I'm worried that Cabinet will try to ram through new mining regulations just before or during the election when accountability and public engagement are low. Clearly, we can and should be doing a lot better, Mr. Speaker. Merci.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to draw attention to the lower grades, specifically JK to grade 3. I don't believe we have ever seen any statistics as to grade levels in relation to the rest of Canada. This will give us an indication whether we need to improve the curriculum in order to set up the students for a better understanding and development of their learning capabilities. Mr. Speaker, when I campaigned in October of 2019, I heard a lot of concerns from parents that these students were not taught English until they reached grade 4. I believe there was a Dene language immersion program, and one of the communities set up as a pilot program was Fort Providence, amongst some other small communities. Mr. Speaker, I have not seen any evaluations nor reviews of this program. Whether we are seeing any success or if there are other challenges that we should know about. Parents had concerns that only being taught in N.W.T language could be an impediment to their children's learning success at an early age. Mr. Speaker, I will have questions for the Education Minister at the appropriate time. Merci.
Thank you, member for Decho. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Mumfui.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am doing my member statement on honoring the Indigenous woman. Mr. Speaker, in my lifetime, Mr. Speaker, maybe even in your lifetime, have seen, it has been recognized, and in this House as well, that Indigenous people are the most, this is a quote, most discriminated against group, end quote, of people in their homeland since colonization. And specifically, it is the Indigenous women who experience firsthand the most discriminations and violence. Mr. Speaker, with this in mind, I want to talk about honoring the Indigenous woman. Mr. Speaker, the North and the entire country is filled with beautiful, resilient, capable, wise Indigenous women and girls. These women and girls offer not just our families, but our communities so much. They bring families together. They raise babies and care for elders. Indigenous women are always caring for their communities. Just like my colleague said, we are natural leaders, and yet we carry a heavy load. In today's world, Mr. Speaker, Indigenous women have to be strong and brave. Despite all the talents and gifts Indigenous women and girls bring to our families and communities, they face unprecedented levels of violence and death. Indigenous women and girls most often bear the brunt of multi-generational trauma, violence and trauma that continues today. In December 2021, the RCMP reported 9 open cases of missing Indigenous women in the N.W.T, but that number could be as high as 14. Mr. Speaker, can I conclude? Can I conclude my statement?
Thank you, member for Mumfui.
Can I have unanimous consent to conclude my statement? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Mumfui. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with permission from her mother, I want to tell you about Savannah Pukiak. Savannah was a bright young woman pursuing a nursing education in Ottawa. When Savannah Pukiak was only 2 days in her new home in Ottawa, she was brutally suffocated and murdered. Savannah had her life stripped of her dignity, her potential, her possibility of nursing, her possibility of a family and a caregiver. Mr. Speaker, I extend my deepest condolences to Savannah's mother, Sheba, and her family and friends who are grieving the loss of their loved ones. Savannah is just one Indigenous woman whose life and dream is lost. Mr. Speaker, Indigenous women are 4 to 5 times more likely to be murdered than all other women in Canada. Mr. Speaker, when we lose Indigenous women and girls, we lose what we could have been. Our teachers, our lawyers, our leaders, and doctors in our communities. Our families grieve for their loss, and the community grieves for the possibility of what these beautiful, incredible, talented women could have become. Mr. Speaker, October 4th is the National Day of Action for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. This is the day that we say their names. We walk the steps they cannot take. We honor their lives so we never forget. I will have questions for the minister responsible for the status of women at an appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumphy. Colleagues, before we continue, it appears the clocks are not working on the minister's side, but you could see it up on the wall there. It appears the clocks are working on the regular member side, but we'll get it fixed end of the day. Just want to bring it to your attention. Member statements, member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that means I can take extra time today. Based on the 2020-2021 Public Service Annual Report, the N.W.T employs 6,252 employees. Of these employees, Indigenous women represent 21% of the total workforce, while Indigenous men are much less represented at a mere 8%. Mr. Speaker, the Northwest Territories population estimates released in July 2022 show that people that identify as male represent 51.4% of the population. And while men represent half of the population of the Northwest Territories, as I said, Indigenous men reflect only 8% of N.W.T employment. What is further concerning, Mr. Speaker, is the trend in employment rates for Indigenous people. While the labour force activity in the N.W.T is positive from September of 21 to 22, the increase was due to the hiring of non-Indigenous persons and those living in Yellowknife. There has been a decline in N.W.T employment rates for Indigenous people, and it's unclear how this negative trend translates into our public service, given the way the data is presented. The Public Service Annual Report showed that as of March 31st, 2021, the N.W.T employs 30% Indigenous employees. The annual report also shows that Indigenous people only represent 21% of senior managers in N.W.T departments. Given the low rate of Indigenous men employed by the N.W.T, it is fair to say few of these Indigenous senior managers are male. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that Indigenous men are not represented as well as Indigenous women and non-Indigenous people in the public service. When we look at mental health triggers for men, a lack of pride or a lack of ability to provide adequately for their families is often cited as a reason for poor mental health. Given the unprecedented rate of suicide among young Indigenous men in our territory, it seems to me that this should be an area of priority for the N.W.T's HR department. So I ask, what is the N.W.T doing about this? There are several programs designed to support the success and development of Indigenous hires, including the Indigenous Career Gateway Program, the Indigenous Management Development Training Program, the Regional Recruitment Program, and summer student hires. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Self-fulfilling. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But how are these programs, Mr. Speaker, supporting the full range of needs of Indigenous men to see them get hired and progress within the GNWT? The GNWT needs to recognize that Indigenous men in small communities, many who have faced layoffs and subsequent economic downturn during the pandemic, face significant challenges to employment and career development within the public sector. And it is time that the GNWT take action on this. Mr. Speaker, I will have questions for the Minister of Finance at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Tuna-Day-Welleday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm the voice for the people in my constituency, and I've been here to bring forward an issue of housing in our communities, and I'm here to make a couple of comments on this. Mr. Speaker, early this year, I provided the Minister responsible for housing, N.W.T, with a thorough list of homes in desperate need of repair in the communities that I represent in the Tuna-Day-Welleday riding. I waited 3 months for the Minister to respond, and what I received was far from adequate to address the significant housing needs in my riding. The Minister has committed to working with respectful political leaders in Thutsuke, YKDFN, and DKFN to complete their housing strategies. Something, Mr. Speaker, that housing in N.W.T ought to be doing anyway. Why am I here, if not to advocate for the needs of my people and to cut through the bureaucratic red tape to find real solutions to their problems? The Minister does not get a gold star for doing what is expected of her portfolio. Under housing and duplicated housing units are chronic issues in the Northwest Territories. There isn't a novel issue, and the programs are doing enough to move the needle towards available, affordable, and adequate housing in the Tuna-Day-Welleday riding. Mr. Speaker, I have spoken to the leadership in our communities, and they tell me it takes 2 to 3 years to complete these housing strategies. We simply do not have time to waste, and we must take immediate action to ensure proper home ownership repairs in all 4 communities that I represent. Mr. Speaker, luckily for the Minister, I have already provided her with a solution to this problem. First, we need to conduct an independent housing assessment in the riding. This assessment will look at the unit condition rating report that will make recommendations on repairs based on current building codes, requirements in the communities, affordable resolution, Thutsuke, and Dedendilo. Once this report is complete, it will include actual costs based on today material pricing needed for the repairs, replacements, and to identify overcrowding issues, ultimately producing a cost action plan to complete this vital work over a 4-year period. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to seek unanimous consent to conclude my member statement. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Tuna-Day-Welleday. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude a statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not only will this resolve many of the housing issues in my riding, but it will create new opportunities to promote local trades and apprenticeship training. Mr. Speaker, this plan is estimated to cost a modest of $350,000, but the benefits will be priceless for the peace of mind, economic opportunities that this work will represent in my constituent. I'm urging the Minister to take a serious look at this plan. Working together across the floor is what we are supposed to be doing in a consensus government. And I sincerely hope that the Minister will be able to find the flexibility within her department to fund this plan immediately and see it through the benefit of the residents of Thutsuke for Resolution Data and Dilo. Later today, I will have questions for the Minister on her commitments to home repairs in my riding. I will also be tabling letters and referred documents earlier at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Tuna-Day-Welleday. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every Northerner loves the cabin, whether it's for hunting, fishing, trapping, or just simply a weekend getaway. People love to go to the cabin. It's one of the reasons people come to the North, and it's one of the main reasons people stay in the North, Mr. Speaker. Yet, if you live in Yellowknife, you better have $500,000 to get a cabin, Mr. Speaker. There is insatiable demand for cabins in the Yellowknife periphery area. And we know this, Mr. Speaker, because the last time we did a lottery for 22 lots on the Ingram Trail, 913 people entered that lottery, Mr. Speaker, for 22 lots. And Mr. Speaker, since that time, how many leases have we given away? 0, Mr. Speaker.
Shame.
Mr. Speaker, we are now seeing what should be $50,000 cabins sell for $250,000. We've artificially inflated the land value, and we've prevented a construction boom of potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of cabins being built. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not suggesting we just open all of the land up to leases immediately. We already had the solution. That was the cabin lottery. It allowed us to plan where we're going to put leases. It allowed us to look at angling pressure of lakes. It allowed a fair way to let people literally win the lottery, because getting one of those leases was like putting $100,000 in your pocket the minute you got access to that land. Now, Mr. Speaker, at that time, the Department of Land said they needed a plan before they did that. And in 2017, they released a plan called the Recreational Leasing Management Framework, a framework that sets out how we give out recreational leases. And this is now the framework that is used everywhere in the territory except the Yellowknife periphery area. And I'm confused why, Mr. Speaker. There's no policy in place. In fact, we are not even following our own framework that sets out when we give access to leases. Mr. Speaker, if we want an economic driver, let's get people some cabins. If we want people to stay in the North, enjoy recreation, enjoy our land, let's get them some cabins. Mr. Speaker, this is a great retention tool. Let people get out on the land. Let people build cabins. Let's do it properly. Let's consult with residents and Indigenous governments and do another cabin lottery. I know many people, including myself, will buy a ticket. I'll have questions for the Minister of Lands on when we plan to do that and when we are going to unfreeze this land. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
When?
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Member statements, member statements, member for Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lois Marie Monette was born in Montreal, Quebec on the 3rd of November 1938 and was at the age of 4. She was adopted by her parents, Harvey and Victoria. As a venturous young lady, Lois ended up in Inuvik, where she took the job as a secretary at the Samuel Hearn School. She was very proud of this move because this is where she embraced the Baha'i faith and met the love of her life, Lois Beck. As true Northerners, they lived in several communities during their time in N.W.T. After getting married, they moved to Fort Smith, where Lois took the alcohol and drug counseling program at Aurora College. As tutor herself, she felt this was the program that would help her help others. After completing the program, they moved to Wrigley to serve as the community's ADA counselor. They were very happy and proud to serve the residents during their time there. This is where I got to meet them both. They were very much part of the community, and I enjoyed their interactions with them. After several years in the community, they had the opportunity to move back to Fort Smith, where she worked with Uncle Gabe's Friendship Center. Unfortunately, Lois started to lose her mobility in early 2000s. So both of them made the hard decision to move back to Nanaimo, BC, to be closer to their two children, Eleanor and Greg. In true Lois fashion, her disability did not slow her down. With help from her loving husband and family, she was still active in the community and family ventures until she passed away from breast cancer on Boxing Day 2021. Lois's beautiful smile, her loving heart, and resilient spirits earned her many admiring friends in the North. She will be remembered by all who knew her and loved her. The family would like to thank everybody for the help during their difficult time. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share some powerful words from a young lady from the community of Wrigley. Lois, I love you and miss you every day. I smile every time I think about you with a happy tear rolling down my cheek because I am forever grateful you have gotten the chance to know you. You're the wisest, beautiful, loving, and caring soul I have ever met. She'll be sadly missed, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Nahende. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and community at this time. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgement. Oh, Member for Nahende.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize one of the pages is this young man there, Logan Dahl. I got to meet him about 2 years ago. He was the president and now vice president. So a young aspiring leader in the community of Yellowknife, and I thank him very much for the opportunity to meet him and look forward to hearing his adventures. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nahende. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Dechu.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize an old friend, Mr. Tony Aquak, who's from Joe Haven and currently the Speaker of the N.W.T Legislative Assembly. Tony and I went to school here in Sir John Franklin back in the day and attended the Acacia Hall student residence, and Tony was a prolific basketball player on our Acacia Hall team. We just only had to pass him the ball at the top of the free throw line. He would jump up in the air and just magically turn full circle and always scores the basket. Still remember that one. Welcome to the Assembly, Tony. And I also just want to recognize someone who introduced himself. I can't remember his name, the Indigenous gentleman from Thunder Bay, Ontario. And it's nice to see an Indigenous person in the whole contingent, and we encourage more of them to join their legislators or work hard to get into those. And I also like to welcome the rest of the contingent from the CPA. Masi.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to welcome all of our fellow parliamentarians, but also I would like to recognize my constituency assistant and also my constituent of Great Slave, Colleen O'Connor, who puts up with a lot when she helps support me. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these questions will be for the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority, although being part of our N.W.T healthcare system, is a separate entity from the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority. We know that funding was identified and provided as a labour market supplement for some employees of the NTHSSA. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister confirm when funding was identified to cover the labour market supplement for the NTHSSA, was additional funding a consideration and identified for employees of the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the process that takes place in order for the labour market supplement to be utilized, Health and Social Services brings forward the request. They know best what their human resources needs are. They bring forward a request to the Department of Finance, to the Financial Management Board, and that is how the funding gets approved. And for Hay River Health and Social Services Authority, as noted, they are separate. They will then know best what their needs are. They will bring forward the request, and then the funding can be put through the Financial Management Board. I certainly know that at the time that the NTHSSA was going through their process, Hay River was already under bargaining, and I'm fully confident that they will be taking into account the needs that they may have for a labour market supplement through that process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Finance confirm approximately how many Hay River Health and Social Services Authority employees, if included, would be eligible for the labour market supplement based on criteria established for payout to the NTHSSA Authority employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can't, but I can't for actually a reason that I think is good, and that is the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority has the opportunity to look at their own human resources needs, to look at their own areas where they're having difficulty in recruitment, and it may well be that their needs are very different, or at least somewhat different than what we had under the first round of labour market supplement. So they now have the opportunity to examine their own direct needs. They're sitting down at the table right now in the midst of bargaining. It's a good opportunity to utilize the policy that we have in place, to apply it to Hay River, and to determine exactly whether they have the same needs as the NTHSSA or whether they have slightly different needs, and then to bring that forward. So assuming they are going to be going forward, and I expect they will with the labour market supplement, that will then be specific and tuned to the needs of the people in Hay River. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm curious to, I guess, know how much money we're talking about. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister confirm if she has an approximate cost to offer up the same labour market supplement to employees of the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority as she did for the NTHSSA? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have an approximate cost, and I certainly want to be cognizant that they are in the midst of bargaining. I certainly don't want to create expectations or limitations on what might be happening at that bargaining table. I would note, Mr. Speaker, that they are not at the same pace in terms of when their collective agreement gets discussed, or even in terms of what the opportunity that NTHSSA had and the Department of Finance had to sit down with the union to do the labour market supplement that applied to the rest of the healthcare workers in the Northwest Territories. All that said, Mr. Speaker, given the size that we were dealing with in terms of the first round of labour market supplement for all the rest of the healthcare authority in all of the Northwest Territories, the cost that might attract or attach to Hay River I expect to not be significant, and as such, it's not something that gives me great concern moving forward. I'm confident that they'll be able to reach an equitable solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I guess my concern is that if we do nothing, then we're going to end up losing healthcare workers in Hay River. So, Mr. Speaker, knowing the Hay River Health and Social Service Authority is in negotiations with the Union of Northern Workers, will the Minister confirm if she'd be willing to reach out to the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority and the Union to discuss a memorandum of agreement that would provide Hay River Health with employees with a labour market supplement? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I share the member's concern. That's why the Department of Finance developed the policy in the first place, so there could be structure by which we can take steps to help with recruitment and retention. That's why there's the health recruitment unit that resides both with Finance and Department of Health. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not the role of Finance to actually direct what's happening with the bargaining units at the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority. They are separate. All that said, I'm quite confident that the authority and the union and the process of bargaining that's taking place there is well aware of the needs and concerns of the healthcare workers in Hay River. And Mr. Speaker, I do not believe that they'll be doing nothing. I simply don't want to impede on the process that's happening. I think a lot of information has been going out over the last few days to assure the workers that they are being heard, and that, again, that process that's underway right now, it is going to take them into account. They won't be left behind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Framley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My questions are for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment, who's also responsible for mining. The timeline for public engagement on mining regulations is slipping and badly. Meanwhile, the department is holding detailed secret meetings with the mining industry. And I did give the minister a heads up, so can the minister tell us how many secret meetings have been held with the mining industry in 2020 and 2022, and why the information presented to them has not been made public? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm inclined to say that there are no secret meetings and simply sit down. That might be one path by which we could go about this, but leaving the wording and the language aside, I know we will not probably see eye to eye on this. There have been 32 meetings held with industry on the Mineral Resources Act regulations. This is indeed with the very entities who will be most directly impacted, most directly involved, and who have the expertise to help develop these regulations. All that said, Mr. Speaker, again, this is a normal process. Processes that are involved in the Department of Finance and the Department of ITI, with which I have the most awareness, I can assure you, all of which we would go to stakeholders who are most directly involved. We would produce what we heard reports. We take the opportunity to have the open engagement platforms with the public. That process is going to occur here as well. There will be ongoing opportunity for interested parties to participate. There is the website open right now. I know, and again, you can't really win. If it's too detailed, we're told we're flooding people, and if it's not detailed enough, it's too general. But I would encourage anyone interested in the area to attend to that website and provide their feedback. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for the information about the 32 meetings. Look, there's one web page on the ITI website about development of these mining regulations with a vague list of topics, and it's been there for 3 months, and there's been literally no changes. I mentioned that, these detailed secret meetings the department is having with the mining industry. So can the minister commit to publicly post the PowerPoint presentations being given at these secret meetings so everyone has access to the information? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Mr. Speaker, just because one person is not maybe at the table doesn't make it a secret meeting. I don't want to belabor this point, Mr. Speaker. These are the industry partners who are most affected, most impacted, and are the experts in the area. But more importantly, we are working with IGCS in this process. The Intergovernmental Council, these are the partners that we're working at with ITI, and I'm very mindful of that relationship. We have, of course, co-management here in the Northwest Territories. It is a system of regulatory processes that we are proud of. And before I go out and make any promises to publish anything that I'm working on with them, I want to go back and make sure that they will not be taken by surprise and that the IGCS, of which the N.W.T is only one member, are on board with what we are publishing and the pace at which we're doing that. So let me go and confirm with those partners and make sure that what we put out to the public is in line with their expectations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. The problem is some information is being shared with, the same industry that this department is supposed to be regulating, and no one else has access to it, the public. When does the public get to have a say on these issues? So, I also mentioned that I had to apply under access to information to get some of the documents that the department has contracted with some consultants. Someone from the mining industry actually thanked me for doing that, and another shares my concerns over the lack of public engagement. So can the minister tell us when any of the contract work and internal research is finally going to be shared with the public so that there's some meaningful public engagement? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
When?
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is quite common, in fact, for departments, all departments, to conduct their research and their policy development and to do that often internally. Sometimes they'll use contracts and sometimes they will not. So the detailed analysis and the research that goes into it does not always form part of the public engagement materials. That is not in and of itself unusual. I am pleased to hear that members of this Assembly are engaged with industry and to discuss with them matters of importance, of shared interest. When there are recommendations ready, then the recommendations will be put out to the public for comment. That is a standard process, and we'll be utilizing that at ITI as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. At some point, there's supposed to be 5 sets of detailed mining regulations posted for comment, and these are going to cover things like royalties, benefits, dispute resolution, and so on. Another vague and high-level what we heard report is just not going to cut it, Mr. Speaker. To ensure that there's some greater transparency and to avoid apprehension of bias by the department that is both a promoter and a regulator, comments made on these draft regulations should be public, and so should any responses. So can the minister commit to ensuring that comments and responses on the draft mining regulations will be made public in the interest of fairness and transparency? Must Mr. Speaker.
Here, here.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the same process that gets utilized when we're developing other pieces of legislation will certainly be utilized here. And in fact, quite often with regulatory development, regulations do not get the same level of engagement and research and input that these regulations are getting. So, but with that said, Mr. Speaker, again, subject only to the fact that there may be parties, there may be members of the public when they submit their comments, again, similar to any other development of legislation or regulation, who do not expect their comments to be made public. So, subject to ensuring that I'm not invading the privacy or confidence of members of the public who might be making comments, it is certainly our intention to try to put out as much information about the policy proposals that are in place, the background to them, and then what kinds of comments are made available prior to having the final materials put together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, before we continue, just want to remind members, normally questions and answers are 5 minutes per person. We're pushing 7, so just give everybody a chance. We'll tighten up the questions and answers. It'd be appreciated. Thank you. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T. Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I might just have one question depending on the answer of the minister. Will the Minister of Infrastructure commit to chip sealing or paving the Marine Basque Bypass Road in N.W.T. next summer? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Thank you, member for N.W.T. Twin Lakes. Minister responsible. Order! Order! Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the department has reviewed the request to chip seal the Marine Bypass Road. So the current cost estimate, and I say that loosely because it may change, is about $1 million, which is about 3 times the cost that is incurred in Southern Northwest Territories. As there are no paving equipment in N.W.T. or in the community, we'd have to bring contractors in from Whitehorse. In order to maximize local benefits and to keep the costs down, we should align this work with some of the paving that's happening at the N.W.T. runway. So, Mr. Speaker, I can commit, you're welcome, to doing this work at the same time as N.W.T. runway. And I'm hoping with that answer, Mr. Speaker, I get no more supplementary. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Techo.
Must Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, following up to my member's statement as to the education grade levels for the JK to grade 3, can the minister provide any statistics to determine actual grade levels of JK to grade 3 in relation to the rest of Canada? Must he?
Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no assessment tool that allows us to assess the grade levels that the member is talking about and compare them to the rest of Canada. Primarily, we use the Alberta Achievement Test as a benchmark for grade levels. Alberta used to offer that for grade 3, but they stopped that in about 2014, so we no longer have that. However, we do use the Early Development Instrument, which provides a snapshot of developmental health in 5 areas, so physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive development, and communication skills and general knowledge. And then we also have the Middle Years Development Instrument for children who are a little older, so that begins in grades 4 to 7, and that is sort of a continuation of that. So from those instruments, we have an idea of how many children are on track with their development or they're in a vulnerable position. So we do have those types of statistics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Decho.
Must see, Mr. Speaker, must see to the minister too. It's kind of alarming that they only have the test for grade 4 and up and not JK to 3 specifically. I'd like to ask the minister, is there a gauge or evaluation as to how to determine if the Dene immersion program is a success or achieving what it is to achieve? Must see.
Thank you, member for Decho. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So when an education body decides to put on an immersion program, they develop a monitoring and evaluation plan, and the Department of Education, Culture and Employment can assist with that. And throughout that process, the education body consistently monitors and evaluates their program, and if they have concerns, they can come to the department and we can provide assistance in how to remedy those. So far, we haven't heard any concerns. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Decho.
Must see, Mr. Speaker, and must see to the minister for his answer. Mr. Speaker, the parents that approached me had concerns their children were not receiving education in the English language at this age, that's the JK to 3, which they believe is the path to success as they progress through the grades. Has the department considered making the N.W.T language program an option in the school curriculum and perhaps introduced at the mid to late grades? Must see.
Thank you, member for Decho. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I often say, and not to pass the buck, but the education bodies in the Northwest Territories have a significant amount of authority. They operate relatively autonomous from the government of the Northwest Territories, more so than in most jurisdictions in Canada. So that decision to have an immersion program is one that the local education body makes. So those are people in the community, on the DEA, who made the decision to go ahead and do that, offer that program. And I'm fully supportive of it. I know the member has brought this up a number of times. I think we have differing opinions. I know parents are concerned about whether learning or being in an immersion program at a young age is detrimental. But that's probably one of the most studied topics in language acquisition, and the research consistently for decades has said that it is beneficial to students. So a student in an immersion program in their early years, they will have a lag in their English acquisition or rules related to using English, things like that. But that lag only lasts about a year or two, and then they catch up to everyone else, and they have the benefit of having a second language. And for many students, that second language is in their own language, the language of their ancestors, which brings with it additional benefits, such as connection to culture and things like that. So I think that, in my personal opinion, I think it's very beneficial to have these immersion programs. I would like to see one in every community if possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Final supplementary, member for Decho.
Must see, Mr. Speaker, must see to the minister for that. As to the success of these programs, that's why I asked if there's any reviews of the program from JK to 3, because it's detrimental to the actual English language teaching that many parents want to see their kids excel at, because they don't learn English till what they're 8 or 9 years old. That is alarming. And thus, we need that evaluation. The program may be great, it is. I'm not against it. It's just the education levels that we have, it's alarming in our Indigenous communities, and especially the small communities, which the Education Department is not paying attention to. And it's in the Auditor General's report. Mr. Speaker, we're all challenged with providing the best education that we can for our youth or future generations. The parents usually get the blame at the end of the day. I've heard this numerous times, even from the department. It's the parents, it's the parents, it's the parents. Makes me wonder if it is the shortcomings of the department and the educators to lay blame on the parents. Can the minister commit to reviewing the education curriculum to determine if the department is achieving what it should achieve in providing the best education to our future generations? Masi.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just to clarify, I never blame parents. Some parents, I'm sure they are to blame. But what I say is that we need partnerships. Everyone needs to be involved. If a parent doesn't care if their kid gets up in the morning and goes to school, then yes, that parent is to blame. But we as the government need to make sure that parent wants to send their kid to school. We need to provide an environment that that parent has trust in, and we need to provide staff that that parent has trust in, so they're going to want to send their children to school. So it's not black and white, it's not one or the other. We all need to work together. That's the only way education will ever succeed. I will say that we have reviewed the curriculum, and we are currently transitioning to the British Columbia curriculum, as I've mentioned. And as that happens, it gives us an opportunity to fix any of the issues that we've seen over the years. And I will say, in terms of Indigenous languages, we have developed the Our Languages curriculum. And I think it's a world-class curriculum. It's been, I believe it's been called the curriculum of the century, but that's in relation to how long it took to develop. But that goes to show how much work went into it. Work with community members, with elders. So it is really reflective of the people of the Northwest Territories. So we do have a good curriculum when it comes to languages, and we are improving the rest of our curriculum. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, October 4th was the National Day of Action for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. What did the minister responsible for the status of women do on this day? Mr. Speaker, what action did the minister responsible for the status of women take on October 4th to recognize and honor Indigenous women in N.W.T and Canada? Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Mumphy, Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was particularly honored on that day to be invited by the Dene Nation, who had organized a march from Delo up to the Northern United Place in downtown Yellowknife, and I was able to join at the beginning of that. There was a circle that was formed, and where a number of people spoke, and they gave me the honor of speaking as part of the opening of that process before they began their march. That was what I did on that day. I then put information out about what I had said and published some of my statements out on social media to help raise some attention of what was going on. But I know many others took steps that day. There was many other events on that day. And while I'm happy to have the chance to speak about what I did, I'm really more pleased that the members raising this issue so that everyone knows that it was a day and that everyone should be also asking themselves what they did on that particular day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphy.
Mr. Speaker, the Native Women's Association of the N.W.T states we must acknowledge that violence against Indigenous women and girls is a crisis that demands an urgent and active response. Mr. Speaker, we also know that in small communities, there are limited supports available for women struggling in abusive and violent situations. Can the minister explain what types of supports are available within communities for women who choose to stay in community but are struggling with violent or abusive relationship? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for the status of women.
Mr. Speaker, I want to start by saying there's simply not enough supports for women who are struggling in those positions. That is part of acknowledging the crisis that's underway. That is part of being honest as a government about the crisis that Indigenous women and girls face every day in Canada, including in the Northwest Territories. That said, there are supports through Health and Social Services. There are supports, I believe, within EC&E for, depending on the nature of what's being sought. There may be supports with MACA. There are supports in housing. There are different opportunities throughout this government, and even residing within the status of women. There are some small pots of funding for activities that different NGOs, different organizations might want to put on. So, I can certainly try to put together that information, provide it to the member, provide it to the House, and see what we can come up with in general. But again, acknowledging that it's certainly, there's more to be done. I'm not sure where the members' questions might go next, other than to say that, I can try and look into putting that list together across all of departments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphy.
We'll be doing a written statement on this as well. Indigenous women living in relationship and raising children in small communities carry a much heavier burden. Unlike non-Indigenous women in the territory, can the minister explain what type of specific support services are available for Indigenous women living in small communities?
For Mumfui, Minister responsible for the status of women.
Mr. Speaker, I can't speak, Mr. Speaker, for Health and Social Services, for EC&E, for Municipal and Community Affairs, for the Indigenous governments, for EIA that supports those Indigenous governments. So I'm in a bit of a difficult position in that I can't speak to things that may be happening across other departments or other levels of government. What I can say, Mr. Speaker, we are right now at the point of having done engagement on a draft action plan and responding to the national inquiry. I do believe that within that there will be some and further information trying to bring together in a better place the details and the information available so that Indigenous women across the territory better know what supports are available, and so that every member of this government out of the Northwest Territories understands where the gaps are so that we can work to fulfill them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Mumfui.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In December 2021, the government of the Northwest Territories tabled a draft action plan to respond to the calls for justice on missing and murdered Indigenous women. What action have been completed since this document was tabled in the House 10 months ago? And also, I will be doing a written statement for all the cabinets, a classroom assignments. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Mumfui. Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what has happened since the draft plan was filed is that we've been doing engagement with communities and community partners since that time so as to be able to provide a final action plan. And the director of the Gender Equity Unit over the course of the spring, summer, and into this early this fall had, I know, attended in person herself a number of different communities. There were sharing circles, sewing circles, various different ways of trying to have coffee time, different ways of trying to have engagement opportunities across the territory. It was, to be quite frank, Mr. Speaker, more challenging than I would have liked it to be to bring out the kind of engagement that I would have hoped we would have had on this. But that effort was being made, and I am very grateful for the staff at the Gender Equity Division for the work they've done to take this out and to engage directly with individuals and communities. We're now at a point of drafting it, putting it together, and hoping to, and expecting to have it ready to provide to the House this fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to put this minister on the hot seat today. But first, I just wanted to say, as a former member of industry, I'm super happy to hear that the minister is engaging with industry on the regulations for mining, because we always felt like we never had a part of that conversation. So just wanted to throw my support for the minister. And one of the nice things about consensus is I can. My question, though, is can the minister identify whether the N.W.T tracks and reports on Indigenous employment trends by gender, including those who identify as non-binary? And if not, will she commit to starting that type of work? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for finance.
You do get unexpected questions in the House, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't expecting that. As far as I know, we don't track someone who may be non-binary or otherwise not identifying by traditional genders. I think that's an excellent point, and I will bring that to the Department of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I was talking too much, and maybe the minister misunderstood my question. I'm asking about how does the department track employment by gender, including Indigenous breakouts. It was really difficult for me when looking through this research work to discover exactly how that breakout is. I can find stats by men and women, and I can find stats by Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but I can't find that all mixed together. So if the minister could comment on whether that's happening, and if not, could she commit to doing so? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I got so excited about the idea that I may have missed what the question actually was. But so there is tracking that is done. Indigenous Aboriginal women, Indigenous non-Aboriginal women, non-Aboriginal women, and the same for people who self-identify as being male or men. And Mr. Speaker, just to remind folks, because I know that the nomenclature gets a bit challenging, we continue to use Indigenous to mean born in the Northwest Territories, and then Aboriginal to mean what we now generally would refer to as Indigenous. That is language that comes out of the now somewhat dated affirmative action policy, and all of those things are tracked, and then they are tracked based on seniority and whether they are in management or not. And I believe, in fact, with the commitment under the Indigenous Recruitment and Retention Framework, we are breaking that down even further into levels of management. So that should be available in business plans for every department, and I can certainly assist the MLA if there are more detailed findings that she would like me to find for her. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I had acknowledged my constituency assistant, she doesn't have a lot of time to go in and pull that all out of every business plan. So I guess my point being more that maybe having that presented all together and conglomerating that kind of information instead of having it spread across the departments would actually allow us to be looking at this as more of its own issue. So I'm glad to hear the Minister committing to helping with that. As I stated in my statement, there is a lack of supports for Indigenous men and clear pathways for them to get into the public sector. So can the Minister describe whether any of this data does exist, or they're collecting it, or some of the challenges? I guess I'm trying to see how is the department bringing in the socioeconomic factors that are affecting Indigenous men into the recruitment and training programs. I know that's a long, convoluted question, but I know the Minister can answer it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I think I should watch the clock when I try to answer this one. But there's quite a number of things that are happening in the Department of Finance right now, all of which I am hopeful will see a real change in being a more reflective public service. And so just as a very, very quick roundup, of course, there is the Indigenous Recruitment and Retention Framework, which does look at the specific challenges department by department as to why we are not attaining a level of 50% representation by Indigenous people, and including within that the fact that, as pointed out, Indigenous men tend to be less represented. So that is underway, and specific plans attached to each department with their targets are all due to be released this fall. More generally, Mr. Speaker, there is also, of course, the fact that we're looking to have a N.W.T human resources plan. Seems surprising, perhaps, that there isn't one, but at least we are fixing the problem as identified, which will then bring, again, greater cohesion, greater opportunity for that sort of overall wraparound approach that we're looking to have, so that we are a representative public service and a consistently representative public service. And last one that I'll raise, Mr. Speaker, there was already a commitment to review the affirmative action policy, and that work is well underway. In fact, I believe it will be out for engagement with our colleagues across the floor here, as well as with Indigenous governments very shortly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the good thing about Minister Wozniak is she answers a lot of my other questions when she's answering an earlier question. So I guess I just want to ask and maybe leave it a bit of a comment more, but can maybe the Minister speak a little bit about the trends for Indigenous male employment, Aboriginal male employment in small communities? This is a priority of our Assembly to increase employment in general in small communities. So, given that males are so underrepresented in the public service, what is she personally doing to ensure that changes? Thank you.
Member for Great Slave, Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so, again, part of what, it's a bit of the same question or a bit of the same answer, unfortunately, but I do want to emphasize that I'm certainly putting a lot of attention on the affirmative action policy. This is something that drives and governs how hiring takes place right now. It determines whether there are priority categorizations for different individuals. And if that policy that is meant to be doing the thing of bringing greater representation is not achieving greater representation, and it has not for some 30 years, then we do need to look at that underlying policy. So I certainly have pushed that to be reviewed, and as I said, we are at a point now where I think it will be coming out very soon for an engagement, for a look by Indigenous governments, by members from this House, and if that underlying policy can be updated to be made more appropriate, to be made more effective, then I think that's probably one of the biggest single things that we will see will start to change the dial. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Tuna Day, Whittle Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've already provided the minister responsible for N.W.T housing a costed, achievable, and time-bounded proposal to take an inventory of home repairs and replacement needs in my riding of Trinity-Willowday. As of April 1st, 2022, Housing N.W.T implemented changes to home repair eligibility and deadlines. Can the minister confirm that these changes will ensure that all necessary home ownership repairs will be completed in the Trinity-Willowday riding within the next 4 years? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Trinity-Willowday. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for asking the question. I'm very passionate about the portfolio, and I appreciate that, we have conducted our renewal for this government, and also we've updated our mission statement and our values as well, so I appreciate the members keeping my department up to power and our commitment within this government. For the member, as of for this current year, I'm pleased to say that we're going to be investing $12.1 million into the 22-23 in Trinity-Willowday. $11 million of that is to complete 16 public housing unit repairs and 24 housing units. $912,000 for home ownership repair programs for private homeowners and minor repairs for housing N.W.T units. Also, I'm pleased to also include that we have supported a community initiative project in the members' riding as well too, of $100,000 to complete their community housing plan as well too. Must see it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Trinity-Willowday.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm surprised to hear that they're looking at spending some money in my riding. Mr. Speaker, the minister has cited the National Housing Co-Investment Funds as a potential funding source for home ownership repairs. Can the minister elaborate on what potential means when there be enough resources to ensure repairs and replacements of homes in my riding will be made possible through that fund? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Trinity-Willowday. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and once again, thank you to the member as well. The member has also received, I want to say, approximately 7 units that were delivered into his riding that were supported through the co-investment application. So your riding was successful in the application process. What Housing N.W.T has been doing is that we support those 25% requirements of the federal government to have those applications submitted. This government has also committed to Housing N.W.T of $5 million over the next 3 years to support those federal engagement applications as well too. Must see it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Trinity-Willowday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In her written response to my proposal, the minister did not address the matter directly, instead of citing Housing N.W.T partnership with Indigenous governments on their housing strategies. Can the minister confirm that she has reviewed my proposal? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Trinity-Willowday. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And absolutely, I did take a look at the proposal that was submitted, but unfortunately, we don't provide funding directly to members. Therefore, we are working with the Indigenous groups in the appropriate riding of Trinity-Willowday. Must see it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister, final supplementary. Member for Trinity-Willowday.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member, I wasn't really asking for the money to be given to me directly. Mr. Speaker, the money that I was asking for, we could figure out as to how we're going to really do this report needed to assess the housing needs in our riding. So can the minister, or will the minister, commit to securing funding necessary to complete the independent, unbiased home ownership repairs assessment immediately that I outlined in my member statements earlier today? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Trinity-Willowday. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did display a number of funding that will be provided to the members' riding. Right now, we are working with the Indigenous groups in the members' riding. We did fund that project up to $100,000 to submit and further that proposal. Must see it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Right now, there's a recreational lease management framework, and it applies everywhere in the territory. It seems to be working well. Obviously, it doesn't apply in community boundaries or on land withdrawn for Indigenous land claim negotiations. But in most of the territory, you can go out on public land and you can identify a lease, and the department works quite well with you to get one of those leases. And then what happens is you get into the Yellowknife periphery area, and the policy just ceases to exist. There's a land freeze. But as far as I can tell, Mr. Speaker, this isn't actually written down anywhere. What happens is you just have hundreds of people applying for leases, and then they kind of sit in a pile, and nothing gets done with them. And so I'm trying to understand where I could find this and why it exists. Can the minister explain why there is a land freeze in this Yellowknife periphery area? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for asking this question, I think the fourth time, and I think we'll probably ask it a couple more times as we try to move forward on this. Just for the record, so everybody understands, the department is not currently accepting applications for recreation leases along the Ingham Trail. The area has many different users and competing land interests, including areas of cultural importance. Decisions about new recreational leases in the area need to be made with consideration of all these interests. The department is working with Indigenous governments, and I need to really stress this. We're working with Indigenous governments to understand their interests in this area. This essential work is necessary before the Department of Lands can begin accepting applications for recreational leases. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My concern is that, we are presently in the process of getting rid of about 700 squatters in this territory. Those who were squatting before 2014 are eligible for a lease, so we will in fact be giving out leases in this area to people who decided not to follow the law. And I'm not asking for a complete open application process. We know we would get hundreds of applications. I think the department already has the solution. In 2015, they gave out 22 in a lottery. I believe we could approach the Indigenous governments and maybe get agreement for another 22 leases to go out and give some planning to this area. So my question for the Minister of Lands, is the department willing to do another new cabin lease lottery? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for lands.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to answer a question you didn't ask, but I'm going to answer it anyway. So people need to understand the department has posted nearly 100 structures in the North Slave region is working through the enforcement process. Very few of these cabins meet the department's criteria. Any cabins that does comply is still subject to consultation with Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations, which is a fundamental component of leasing process. In regards to the question that he asked, I'm aware there is a strong public demand for recreational type leases outside of Yellowknife, particularly the Ingham Trail. I'm hopeful that a ballot draw for recreational leases along the Ingham Trail will be possible within the life of this Assembly. But I wanted to do it right, ensure we take the respectful approach for leasing outside of the withdrawn areas with land and self-government agreements negotiate ongoing. We do have standard criteria and conditions for cabin leases we issue, and so that criteria will apply to the future ballot draw. So again, we are working through a process, and we're hopefully having it done by the end of this fiscal year, or this Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to hear that, we are working towards this. I do truly believe that we can work with YKDFN and get some sort of agreement on a plan. Obviously they have their land withdrawal. We're not talking about that land, and on how we manage public land in this area with competing interests. My question is, I often hear the response that this is all tied up in accomplishing our Public Land Act regulations and bringing some certainty to how we actually regulate the public land. Can the minister provide an update to this House on the Public Land Act regulations and when those will be implemented? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The scope of the Public Land Act regulations work is significant, and they are being collaboratively developed with Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations under the Interdepartmental Council Protocol on legislative development. So again, what I was hoping to do is have this process done, but we've now added this process, which allows us to do it properly and work with our Indigenous governments and organizations. While the department is working to have Public Land Act come into force at the end of this fiscal year, there are many factors beyond its control and that could delay the timeline. Again, I want to ensure the work is done right and we take a respectful and appropriate approach under the Intergovernmental Council Protocol, ensure adequate stakeholders' engagement and fulfill the government's consultation agreement. Once the regulations are further along in the development process, I will be able to provide a more concrete update on the timelines, and I'll provide that to committee when it's ready to go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I did my thank yous to my front line staff and all the people that have been helping us, I guess, across this last probably 3 months. That's been so. We're in a suicide crisis in the Beaufort Delta, Mr. Speaker. You've been affected. Everybody in the Beaufort Delta has been affected one way or another with this, what's been happening. I brought this up 18 months ago in the House, Mr. Speaker, on the post-COVID, what are we doing to help the people in regards to when we come out of COVID, post-pandemic? Mr. Speaker, I challenge all of us 19 members in this House to work together for our constituents and our youth and our young men, our young women, and our families that are so affected across the territory. But, Mr. Speaker, today I'm asking if Minister Thompson, under Sport and Recreation, is the Minister willing to work together with myself and the members on this side of the House and the whole House to do a suicide prevention task force in regards to not so much to work together to make sure there's sporting events going on in the communities like long ago when we were kids. You'd have soccer in Aklavik, basketball in Fort McPherson, hockey and Tuck, and different events that were an education minister to step into and our health minister and to make sure that we're able to do something like this, but take it more seriously. It's so easy to hear it on the radio, like I heard on the radio station, oh, we're in a crisis. We live it, Mr. Speaker. We live it. We need to help. We're in a position to help, to make our people, help our people in this way. But I asked Minister Thompson if he's willing to take the lead with myself, working with him to betterment of our youth and our school system and our mental health as a whole post-COVID. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, and I thank you, the member, for the question. I've had the opportunity to talk to Mayor Elias and the member about this very specific issue. As well, I had the opportunity just, I think it was on Monday, to have the opportunity as a Child and Family Committee of Cabinet, had the opportunity where Minister Green brought forth this very concern and how we can work collaboratively together. I can't make a commitment to for social services or EC&E, but from Municipal and Community Affairs, I'm willing to work with the other side, work with the members on how we can help get our youth more active, more the opportunities to work. We do have staff out there, we have organizations out there that within the sport and recreation system that we can work together, and I'm more than willing to have that opportunity to sit down with committee, but also the individual member up in the Beaufort Delta and that members from up there, see what we can do collectively. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for the N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, when you look back at what we've been going through the last few months, there has been so much pressure put on our mayor and council, our community corp, and our leadership to try to work together. And I thank the Minister of Health also for stepping into making for getting funding for stuff like what we needed to do, but it's not their job in regards to, as a council. The job is to make sure that everybody works together, but it's not a day. We need help with our social services and working together with putting all our community organizations working together. So if everybody puts one thing a month, RCMP has one slot for 2 weeks, another one myself, the Hamlet Recreation Department. So you're filling up and keeping people busy from drinking and drugs and stuff like that, keeping them busy on that Friday night. I have a young guy, Muck, we call him Muck, Pat Kaptana's son. He's an awesome young man. He's really doing good for our youth. But something like that with Minister Simpson, I guess I'm going to float around, working together. I know that it's been really trying times. We need to work together for the people. It's easy to hear it, like I said, you're hearing it on the radio. So easy to say, and we sit down here, and when we're able to do so much, I want a commitment from the Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you. I'll make that commitment right now in this House that I'm more than willing to work with them. We are working on our youth strategy plan right now and how we're able to make it better for residents of the Northwest Territories. But the member talks about a very serious situation, and collaboratively, I think we can come up with a solution. I just don't think it's just one department. It's the collective that we need to address this. In my writing, I've seen people that have unfortunately committed suicide as well, and it's a very trying thing on the community. But I'm more than willing to work with the member on how we can get things done, how we can provide opportunities for our youth in the communities, and working with the Minister of Education and the Minister of Health and Social Services. We're very serious about this. We did have, like I said, we had our first meeting on this as a cabinet, and it was an hour and a half, and we've already made a commitment for the next meeting to have the similar conversations on how we move forward. But we're more than willing to work with the member. We're more than willing to work with committee. This is a serious concern. And I shouldn't just say committee, the collective, the 19 of us, how we work together on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for N.W.T.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm really happy to hear that, but I'm challenging all of us members of this Legislative Assembly to work together for the betterment of the people of the Northwest Territories, our youth, our elders, everybody that's affected. And we have to get through this, and we will, because we're resilient in regards to what for the people that we represent. And I think that if we have the commitment from the Minister, the working group, and we're going to get something started here. I'm going to talk to my AOC chair to get a working group to work together for the betterment of the territory, and I thank the Minister for that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your time.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Take that as a comment. Oral questions, Member for Mumfwee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a follow-up question from yesterday to the Housing Minister. Mr. Speaker, our elders are having a difficult time. Many have significant debts owed to the Housing Corporation from many, many years ago. The amounts are more than any elders can pay. Their modest income are being garnished, leaving them with almost no income. Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit to immediately reviewing the Housing Corporation policies so as to establish a process for clients, especially the elders, to apply for forgiveness of their housing debt? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfwee. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, I hear the member's concern, and working with the Clecho government and working within that riding as well too. I've seen a lot of successes as well with the collaboration. We have also developed a working group with the Clecho government, so the departments have been bringing up issues such as these as well to further address them, and they were also successful in receiving the distinction-based funding as well. I hear that they are going to be receiving, I want to say, 16 additional units coming into their community. But to answer the question, yes, I will commit to be working with the member and looking at the review of those debts, but further explaining that if these debts are more than 10, 15, 20 years, I would like to look at those and see what we could come up with for better solutions on how to look at those recoveries. Must seat, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphrey.
I know we don't have enough time, but I'm going to follow up with a question on this, written statement. Mr. Speaker, the situation is very serious. The cost of living is going up. Everything costs more. Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit to directing her officials to immediately stop garnishing the income and those owing money to the Housing Corporation until her officials can develop a plan to allow people to apply for forgiveness of their housing debts? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumphrey. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with the portfolio, we are committing to the N.W.T that we are doing things differently. Working with the Indigenous groups is a priority. I also am Indigenous. I do come from a smaller community as well, and I see these issues reflected in my riding as well. And looking at further finding solutions, but I do want to highlight to this government that the amount owing from the public to Housing N.W.T is approximately about 19 million. So I don't know if this government is wanting to write off 19 million for the N.W.T. But I can work with the member as well in looking at finding further and stronger solutions on how to address these issues. Must seat, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphrey.
Well, this is the government. Okay, so, Mr. Speaker, I know that things take time, but the elders don't have the time. We need to honor our elders, not make their lives more difficult. Mr. Speaker, when will this government act to help our elders and some of the families that are going through a hard time as well with the garnishee? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumphrey. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and respectfully, I'm open to be working with every single member throughout this government as well, too, and trying to find further solutions and better options. I myself do come from a smaller community. I am Indigenous as well, too, and our ridings are quite close, and we do have further discussions as well, and there's quite a large amount of similarities as well, too. I've also committed to be working with the member, but also with those conversations, I would like to highlight the situation that we are in a crisis in the Northwest Territories. We have thought and tried to work with the federal government into addressing those issues throughout the Northwest Territories. I see that we have been quite successful in receiving approximately $500 million to the Indigenous groups within the lifetime of this government. It's a work in progress. The department is trying to address all of these issues. Must seat, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Mumphrey.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the information. I will be doing, this is just more of a comment, but I will be doing a written statements for the ministers on this, because this is an important issue for many of my constituents, not just my constituents, but also the N.W.T as well, who are finding themselves in this situation. Well, you know yourself too, you probably have some constituents that are going through the same thing, so we do need to address this, and this is an important issue for the people of the Northwest Territories, especially those living in the small communities. So I will do written questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumphrey. Take it as a comment. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has expired. I know we could go on all day here, but but for the future, like when you want to go on again, I highly recommend you try to get on the list first. Like signal to me, and I'll put you on. That way, you know, you signal again that you want to go on second time, because by the time you're almost last, you know, you're fourth or fifth on the second round. So just a heads up. Written questions, returns to written questions, replies to Commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, Minister responsible for justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following two documents. Annual report on the activities of the rental officer, April 1, 2021 to March 31, 2022, and Legal Aid Commission of the Northwest Territories, Annual Report 2021-2022. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents, Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following three documents. Conference of Management Authority Species at Risk Annual Report 2021-2022, Northwest Territories Species at Risk Committee Annual Report 2021-2022, and the N.W.T. Cumulative Impact Monitoring Program 2021-2022 Annual Report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents, Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, report of special warrants issued June 6, 2022 to October 13, 2022. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents, member for Tunaday-Welday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table photographs of public housing units of tenants who are experiencing cockroaches infestation. And Mr. Speaker, I will be tabling documents on Monday as well of my correspondence with the minister, so I want people to see and understand the issues in my writing. And I'll do a member statement as well on Monday on this. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Tunaday-Welday. Tabling of documents, Notices of motion, motions. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills, first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, Bill 23 and 29 with member for Nevicton Lake signature.
That slid off. I forgot this chair. All right, I now call the Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the chair rise and report progress. Merci.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
please have the report of Committee of the Whole, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes?
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering Bills 23 and 29 and would like to report progress. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Do we have a seconder? Member for Great Slave. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Orders of the day for Monday, October 17th, 2022, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, oral question 1163-19-2, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to commissioner's address. Petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions 60-19-2 and 61-19-2, notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, bills 23, 29, 48, 52, and 53, Committee Report 32-19-2, report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Monday, October 17th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m.